Okay, so item 1, if the committee recalls, this is access to fire pump rooms. I'll refresh everybody's memory. We heard this on 2 different occasions, 2 different hearings. We spent about an hour and a half in committee session. And then we had 2 different subgroups working on off committee time to come together with the language. So hopefully everybody can see that on the screen. Third revision. Is there any comments or questions?
Is this the revision that was sent back in, or is this the original?
Hopefully, hey, Robert Merlino, are you on?
Yeah, we had 2 versions of this revision. We had the extremely detailed one that Brad had written up, and then we had the kind of abbreviated version that I wrote up, which was the exceptions were the same in both of them. It was the base text was different between the 2 of them. Do you know which one this is, Tony?
I was under the assumption it was the latest and greatest. That's what the consultant said in or posted.
And this is the one that was linked to the agenda. So if there's a different one, that would need to be tracked down.
Yeah, this might have been the one that the committee was trying to edit during the meeting. It doesn't look like yours, Robert, and it doesn't look like mine either.
Hey, Robert, unfortunately, since I'm moderating, I don't want to look through my emails. I wonder if it's easiest to scan your latest emails and see how we compare.
Yeah, I'm looking right now. And yeah, we had a Word doc with 2 options in it, but it never got translated to this document, I don't think.
Yeah, and I believe that's the interchange Shauna was involved with, right? Shauna Mozingo.
And this version here is definitely, the exceptions are an old version, not the most recent ones we came up with.
So Robert, I wonder if it's best if I let you share the screen.
I can do that.
Hey, Tony, this is Steve. You want me to send you what Shauna sent back on April 13th? Looks like she had those the fire pump modifications.
Yeah, I can either email this to you quick, Tony, or I can just share my screen.
Okay, if you got it, Robert, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we'll have you share your screen, Robert, and then once we discuss it, you can post it in the comments.
Yeah.
And everybody can have that final copy.
Okay, everyone see that now? So there are 2 versions we came up with. Option 1 written here is Brad's version. The exceptions are all exactly the same in both versions. The base text of 5093 in option 1 is extremely detailed and goes into pretty much every requirement you could get into as far as fire pumps. Option 2 was the exceptions are the same, but the base text of 5093 is essentially where we left it prior to our most recent revision. I'll leave option 1 up on the screen, so you guys can read through that.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, has everybody on the committee had a chance to read through that? And if not, maybe we should take a minute. But I'm sorry, I'll be chirping in your ear while you're doing that, but there was a lot of discussion on this, and I tried to capture the details of those discussions, especially the questions about, travel distance and then ratings of the room and the walkway, whether you call it a corridor or an exit passageway. Capture all of that detail in this, and tried to refer back to the base code as wherever I could for ratings and construction requirements. So apologies, I'll let you guys read it.
Yeah, now Brad, if I remember correctly, the committee had approved the changes and they had deferred final language to the subcommittee. Is that your recollection?
Yeah, I was supposed to come back for one more vote. I think Robert's thrust is that he'd like to try to see it be made simple. You know, and there's a lot of wisdom to that. And then, and my approach was I was trying to address all of the questions, I guess, that seem to be unknown or established maybe by tribal knowledge versus policy or code, to try to address those. And again, that's why you get into the construction requirements and the step height and, you know, all those kinds of things I pull from different parts of the code, and or am pointing to those parts of the code in this.
And I think the changes we were last debating all had to do with exception 1, kind of related to how you define an exit path, which were cleaned up. And I in my opinion, I like where they're at now as far as exception 1 goes. So then it's just back to the base text, whether we like the amount of detail that's there or just a more basic abbreviated version where everyone would then have to refer back to IFC and NFPA 20 for the more specific items.
So yeah, again, I would encourage the committee to make sure they read through it. What I did is I said the pump has to be located on the first floor, and then I put into the exceptions that it can be located 1 story away from above or below grade plane, with the conditions of a protected access path, as being in a continuous enclosure.
Robert, can we scroll down and see option 2?
Yep, here's option 2. And again, the exceptions are the same as option 1. It's just the base 5093 is different.
Oh, I see what you mean, Roger. You kept the same exceptions that I put in there. I got it. Okay. Not Roger, Robert. Sorry.
Any questions, comments from anybody on the
Well, I think
hearing?
option 2 does give it simple. I mean, keeps it simple, not and the exceptions is what you really look at, because if you can't have it on that first level, you at least got that option, exception 1, and you define it pretty clear that that path and everything has to be certain rating and everything. So it just depends on how much. I mean, right now, if you go with option 2, then they got to dig into the IFC to find out what the requirements are, where option 1 at least gives you all the detail and you don't have to do any more searching.
My concern with option 1 would be in the future, if IFC or NFPA 20 is revised to have different requirements, then you're stuck with all that stuff in your amendment already not matching NFPA 20 if there are changes there.
Yeah, true.
Yes. So could we go back to the text on option 1, the initial text? So that shall be located on exterior wall, the first story above grade plane. That first, the first paragraph there, fire pump room shall be located, or fire pump shall be located in a fire pump room protected against possible interruption of service. Again, that was, Robert's right, that we brought that in from NFPA 20, but that was part of the discussion that was going on, in that not all of those little nuances in NFPA 20 were known by the individuals that were in the discussion. But I think pretty much the whole first paragraph there, if you're concerned about what Robert was just saying, and it's a valid concern, if you're concerned about that, we could just drop that whole first paragraph, I think. Except maybe access doors shall be labeled in accordance with 901-472. Tony, what was the NFPA standard that we were wrestling with a number of years ago for getting adequate air for fuel-fired engine-driven pumps, diesel pumps?
Yeah, NFPA 37.
Yeah.
Combustion air and cooling air.
So there's a sentence in there acknowledging that we need to have combustion air and enough air to keep the room cool for, and so that 90-degree temperature, oh, by the way, I just pulled that from memory because I could not remember the standard that you just listed. Was there a maximum temperature, operating temperature in the room in NFPA 30, what did you say, 7?
Correct. I believe it's 120, Brad.
120 degrees? Okay, so that should be changed, I think, to match that, unless we want it. I thought 90 degrees would be pretty hot already, but. What did you see? Fire pump rooms shall be protected in accordance with section 91321. That's, that's in our code, or in the fire code, sorry. But then the heat, normal emergency lighting, ventilation, drainage in accordance with section 913.3, but NFPA 913.3 doesn't include all of those things. NFPA 20 does. So to Robert's point, I try not to be too specific in the requirements being pulled from NFPA 20, but more or less listing what things are affected by NFPA 20 and then pointing to NFPA 20 to go find the details.
Okay, it looks like we have several hands up. Steve Rondinelli.
Yeah, question for the rest of the group. So what we see on the screen, basically, we would be looking for some committee action either for option 1 or option 2. Is that how I understand what's on the screen?
Or neither. I guess both could be rejected.
Understand. Well, if a motion's in order so we can move forward, I do such, but I don't want to cut off any additional conversation on it. I think we've talked a lot about it over the last 6 weeks, 2 months. So I'm going to make a motion to at least start moving forward, but I don't want to cut anybody off.
Sure. One last opportunity. Anybody have any comments or additional discussion points before we take a motion? Okay, Rondo, it sounds like no one's raised their hand.
Okay.
You want to make a motion?
I will. I'll make a motion that we accept option 2 as presented on the screen and I guess I need a second, and then I'll give my thoughts.
Anybody for a second?
I'll second that.
And I guess the justification for my motion is related to I'll say the simplicity of option 2. I like the simplification of option 2, and I'm a little concerned with trying to keep up with the amount of detail that's provided from standards in code language. And so I think having a more simple explanation of where it goes, the exceptions listed, gives us flexibility. And then obviously the designer still has the responsibility to follow all the standards, meet ambient temperature requirements, air, combustible air, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, my hesitation is option one may have too much in it, and the potential to miss something or have to change it as the standards change.
Okay.
My concern on it would be the title of the section is location and access to indoor fire pumps. And it gets into option one gets into a lot of information besides location and access. And I agree with what Steve said about just keeping up with the sheer number of references there.
Perfect. Based on that motion, let's go ahead and take a vote.
Wait, did you want to do discussion and rebuttal?
Okay, sure.
So if you go back up to option one, I mean, it looks, none of the detail there is actually, there's no detail pulled from the standards that, you know, that points to NFPA 20 for the things that NFPA 20 regulates, but it leaves it to NFPA 20 to provide that detail. And again, this was the bulk of the discussion and the questions when we decided to table this from the committee action. Was these were all the things that people brought up that you know, wanting clarification on and not having to comb through the code, I guess, to try to find them. And so, you know, you see references to IBC section 716 for fire barriers. You see, you know, those are the kinds of things that architects would need when they're actually laying out the building to design the walls, to find the UL listings for the different partition and horizontal assemblies, things like that. Those are the sections of the code that they would need. So when they get into the fire code, which is already a stretch on the architectural side, this at least points them to the world that they're familiar with. And it doesn't bring it doesn't really bring in detail. Like, it doesn't say you got to have 2 layers of gyp or something like that. It's really more set up as pointers. And as far as the code references, NFPA 20 is just referenced in general. So as long as the title of NFPA 20 and its jurisdiction doesn't change, we shouldn't have to worry about edits to NFPA 20. The other sections have to be updated every code cycle anyway. Every code cycle, we're faced with this situation of all the references from the previous code cycle could change slightly in the next code cycle because the section numbers change. So that's just business as usual. So anyway, I would advocate for the more detail again to help not only answer the questions that the committee was wrestling with when we were discussing this, but the architectural world in general who has to design to this versus the fire protection community. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else on the call wish to speak? Okay, so based on that and based on the motion on the floor, the motion is to accept option 2. Let's take a vote. So those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, they're slowly trickling in. Okay, so I've got 8 hands in favor. Lower your hands. Those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, I've got 2 hands. Please lower your hands. Those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, so that motion passes 8 to 2 to 0. And Robert, I'll take the screen back from you. We'll move back to the agenda and proceed item number H. And Brad, this is item 80 regarding chapter 40 of distilleries.
Tony, on that one, I'll email you the that version we were just looking at, so you have the most current copy.
Okay, perfect. Or you can just drop it in the chat here. That way everybody's got it.
So I'll just email to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Tony, could we do the next one first, the definitions first? That would be easier to get out of the way.
Okay, so that would be
Aye.
item I, and it's proposal number 81.
Yep.
Chapter 40 definitions. And hopefully you can see that on the screen now.
So, yeah, so basically, part 1 there was heard by the Building Code Committee yesterday and was approved. Part 2, basically what happened is that this was initially, this chapter in the Fire Code Amendments was written in 2016, I think, for the 2015 code. At that time, a lot of terms that were specific to the industry and to this function were included in that chapter. In the subsequent code cycle for 2018, to be consistent with the rest of the code, all of the definitions in this chapter were moved lock, stock, and barrel, so to speak, to the definitions section of the fire code, which is chapter 2. The problem with that is that a lot of these things, a lot of these terms are used throughout the code, but when they were developed, when they were defined in the distilleries chapter, they were specific to distilleries. And so by moving them to the generic or the general section, chapter 2, there were items defined that really should not be regulated in the ways that other chapters, other sections in the code would refer to them. They really didn't have that same meaning. They meant something different. And so what this is this is an attempt to turn these definitions into one or the other. Either make them general so that they can apply in other sections of the code, or where necessary, to make them specific to alcohol beverage production facilities, which are breweries, wineries, and distilleries, but primarily distilleries. The distilleries are the facilities that are most heavily regulated. Breweries and wineries are less regulated entities. But the point is that all of them are alcohol beverage production facilities. And so anyway, the change here in the definitions is to basically say, if this definition only applies to APBFs, then that sentence has been inserted in the definition. And where it can apply generally, it was tweaked to allow for that. So you'll see, like under tank, for instance, in an alcohol beverage production facility, ... And so that phrase was added to a number of these things so that the definition wasn't going to be confused if that term was used somewhere else in the code.
Okay, any discussion, commentary from anybody on the call? Brad, and you so you mind explaining yesterday's iteration with the building code committee?
So on the definitions, it was strictly the term, the code uses the word alcoholic beverage. When we wrote this section, we used the term alcohol beverage. And so the definition in the building code was just to say that those are one and the same.
Okay, anybody, any discussion or anybody willing to make a motion?
Hey, Tony, sorry, this is Wayne real quick. Is there a link to where these are posted just so that I don't have to read the screen? I don't think I got a link like we were in previous meetings with the agenda.
Yeah, it's in the same location.
Okay. So if I go back to one of the previous
Yeah,
meeting invites.
Let me post a link onto the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, you should have that available, Wayne.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Yes, this will help immensely.
Perfect. Okay, so I will make a motion to accept the proposal as presented.
This is Craig. I'll second that.
Perfect. Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand.
Tony, I'm raising my hand. I can't find where my control is.
Okay.
Action.
I got you, George.
All right.
Okay, so we got nine raised. Please lower your hand. Those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, please lower your hand, and those abstaining, raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like that proposal passes. The vote was 9-0 to 1. Okay, Brad, proposal number 80, also chapter 40.
So Denver Fire developed this chapter again back in 2016, and it was in the amendments before a national version was created. There are a lot of problems with the national version. It is still in a state of flux. It is still evolving, and it's not very well done from a code enforcement standpoint yet. I imagine it will get there, but it isn't there yet. Denver Fire spent a lot of time developing this, the existing chapter, but as the national code iterates, there are certain things that get changed, certain phrases, words, whatever, that get changed. And so what this proposal is doing is in essence accepting where the changes at the national level are consistent with the Denver Fire Department chapter level, accepting those changes and including them or not deleting them, and then deleting or editing those changes where they are inconsistent with the Denver Fire chapter, so that we continue with a consistent enforcement of these facilities eventually I would imagine and this has happened in a bunch of cases, the national code will slowly make its way towards the Denver amendment. And then the need for this will go away, but it is not there. It's not close to there yet. So that's the primary set of changes that you see here. The first part 1, for the building code was heard yesterday, and that was approved. And basically what the building code changes are, and these have been in the building code now for 2 cycles, at least 2 cycles, and they'll be again for the 2024, is that the building code basically prohibits distilleries from being classified as an H occupancy regardless of the quantity or type of hazardous materials. And as probably most people on this meeting know, distilleries are distinctly different from breweries, and distilleries refine the alcohol beverages so that the concentration of alcohol is increased tremendously. There are certain thresholds there that are established by definition of what's called Class 1B flammable liquids, Class 1C flammable liquids, and distilled products, alcohol beverage products with very high concentrations of alcohol fall into those classifications. They are flammable liquids by definition and by physical properties. And so it is, Denver has not accepted that regardless of the quantity of flammable liquids that you could have in your facility, that occupancy classification of S1 or F1 should be assigned to it. And part of the rationale for that is there's a whole litany of requirements in the building code that were not considered when the National Fire Code Committee developed their chapter. And probably the most concerning of that set of 31, I think, sections in the building code is the fact that if you force a distillery to be classified as an S1 or an F1 occupancy, then separation from other occupancies is not required. And so you could literally have a still in the middle of a bar, which is an A occupancy, with an open flame underneath it, 500 gallons of a Class 1B flammable liquid heated to its boiling point, which is way above its flash point. And then you'll have some portion of piping with, flammable liquid vapor in it under pressure with, in the middle of a bar. And so that we believe that's inappropriate. And so what this proposal is doing is basically, like I said, undoing some of the changes that are not consistent with the Denver chapter, but also accepting some of the changes that have evolved and are consistent with the Denver chapter. Oh, and the building code portion was heard yesterday and was approved. So you see right where it says, go up a little bit, Tony. One change up a little bit more, sorry. Right there. One of the changes that's occurred and what the national code did, if you see the FM Global Property Loss Prevention Data Sheet 7-29, that evolved in 2019 or 20 based on some very large scale tests that FM ran at their facility. It's in Rhode Island or Maryland, I think, but they since came out with sprinkler criteria for the storage of spirits in wooden barrels and casks, which had not existed before this. There were other, like the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, the recommended fire protection practices listed just underneath that one. There were recommended practices, but none of them were based on tests. They were simply based on somebody thought it should be a good idea kind of thing. And so FM finally did a bunch of tests. At the national level, what they did is they actually pulled specific sprinkler criteria out of that loss prevention data sheet and inserted it into the code. That caused a lot of consternation with NFPA, as you can imagine, for the same reasons that Robert was just alluding to earlier, is that, okay, now NFPA, what is NFPA 13 supposed to do? If they publish something that's not consistent with the fire code, now you've got two conflicting nationally accepted standards that, which one do you choose, right? So instead of that, what we've done here is we simply said that the design engineer is permitted to use the FM Global Loss Prevention data sheet in their design, and the fire code official and building code officials are permitted to consider that as a design basis, you know, versus having to require it to be, say, a listed assembly or something like that. So that's an example where this document got moved in the direction of what the national code was trying to do. But up at the top there where it says Group F1 distilled spirits, Group S2 distilled spirits, the national level, they mandated that all buildings, rooms, functions, portions thereof where the distilled spirits are being produced or stored have to be sprinklered. And to be consistent with what we've adopted since 2016, we're saying that if you're not an H occupancy, or if you don't have to be sprinklered for any other reason, then you don't have to be sprinklered just because you're distilling spirits or storing them. And the threshold there is 120 gallons if people are interested. At 120 gallons, you become an H occupancy if you're not sprinklered. If you fully sprinkler your building, you can go to 240 gallons and not be classified as an H. But anything above 240 gallons, you have to be classified as an H if you're dealing with Class 1B or Class 1C flammable liquids. There were a lot of changes proposed in this chapter, but the consultant, when they went through it, determined a lot of them simply to be editorial changes. And so what you see here is sort of a distilled version, if you will, of what was initially written up. And the changes that, a lot of the changes in here are really still editorial. They're not changes that affect the way the code is enforced now, but they're simply reorganized to be better code. So like what Tony's showing here on this right there, under 4003.2 occupancy classification, you'll see the sentence added quantities of ethanol mixtures exceeding the MAQs but packaged in individual closed ... That's essentially the same thing as the exception down below that's struck out. So it was moved into that section just to simply be written better code. And I'm going to say there's no real code changes here in terms of what Denver currently enforces. The changes that you see are going to be mostly something is deleted but then reworded more clearly or better in another section. So they're basically I'm going to say they all are editorial changes. And then you see the exceptions: sprinkler discharge criteria established by an approved engineering design. That alludes to the ability to pull in that FM data sheet that we were just talking about.
Okay, so let's take any discussion or questions from anybody on the call. Steve, I see you have your hand up. Rondinelli.
I'm ready to make a motion if there's not any other discussion.
Okay, let's give everybody a moment. Anybody raise your hand? Further discussion? Okay, nothing appearing. Rondo, you want to make a motion?
I will make a motion to approve as submitted with the justification provided by by Brad Emmerich, as well as the adoption of it, the approval of it by the Building Code Committee yesterday.
Second.
Okay, and that second was Wayne. Was that Wayne?
Yep.
Okay. So anybody with any discussion or questions? None. Okay, so all in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, looks like we have 7 in favor of. Put your hands down. All opposed, please raise your hand. All opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, that's none, please. Okay, all abstaining, raise your hand, please. Great, thank you. So that motion passes, approved, 7 to 0 to 1. Thanks, Brad.
Sure.
Okay, moving on. Item 1B, it's proposal number 49. And this proposal was we heard this in the prior hearing, and we brought it back for rewording. And what you see on the screen was what was reworked by Shauna. And essentially, to refresh everyone's memory, we were not requiring remote status panels for generators being installed in 1- and 2-family dwellings in townhomes. Any
Tony, can I interrupt
commentary
you?
or discussion?
Can I interrupt you real quick, Tony? This is Chief DeBar. My apologies, but I think I'm on like some sort of delay, I believe, because whenever I put my hand up, it actually comes up, I believe, in the abstaining when I look back through your numbers. So I have to apologize for that. I don't know why when I raise my hand, it's on delay, but so is your guys' commentary because I just switched over from my computer and I noticed that I have a delay on my phone. So that's my apologies on those 2 votes.
Okay.
So I apologize to the committee for that. I'll keep playing with this and see why it's doing that, but I had the same issue yesterday.
The good thing, Chief, I think there was no impact because they all passed unanimously.
Well, I wanted to be the most impactful and show that I was in support of Brad.
Nailed it.
Thanks, Chief.
All right. Any commentary or discussion on proposal number 49? I see no hands. Anybody willing to make a motion?
I think I have a question, but I'm reading through this again here real quick to refresh my memory.
Go ahead, Robert.
So if I remember correctly, we left this at the base code section had to do with the generator sections require, the wording is emergency power systems and standby power systems required by this code shall comply with these sections. So there was some debate about whether this section would even apply at all, or the revision I'm seeing here isn't. I thought we had more than that to return to.
Yeah, and I thought, Robert, you're right. We'd had that discussion and then we've gone back through and realized that the base Denver amendments also included optional standby generators in the title. So if you
Yeah,
go
okay,
through-
that's right. That's ringing a bell now.
Yeah, if you go through and look at 1203 of the
Yep.
existing amendments, it includes the title optional standby generators. But you're right, the base IFC did not include that wording within the titles.
So I guess where we left this is, excuse me, is your intent here to not require remote status panels on any generators in single family homes and townhomes, whether they are required to be there or not?
That's correct.
Okay, then I think this is accomplishing that.
Yeah, I would agree. If that's the intent, then I think that's exactly what this says. Should we make a motion?
Yeah, I was gonna say, that being said, Wayne, I'm just gonna make a motion to accept this as written.
Second it.
Okay. Okay, any further commentary or discussion? There is none, so let's take a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand.
I'm in favor, Tony. I'll have to reboot.
Okay. So based on that, it looks like we have 9 in favor of. Let's lower our hands, please. And all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we have 1 opposed. Please lower your hand. All those abstaining, raise your hand.
Sorry, Tony, I wasn't opposing. I just didn't drop my hand in time.
Okay. And that was Craig, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So based on such, it looks like it passes 10-0-0. Perfect. Okay, so moving right along, the next series are chapter 53 and pertain to carbon dioxide.
Tony, if I can just interrupt, didn't we want to do something for JD? If you had another meeting, or did we already get to that one? I may have missed it while I was transitioning.
Yeah, I think those were the 2 that Brad did for chapter 40.
Perfect, thank you.
So they all pertain to CO2, although they're all different topics. So I think it's simplest if we hear each one individually and vote on them individually. So let's go to agenda item 1C. And it is proposal number 61. Brian Lucas or Dave Hill, are you on the line to present? I see Dave, you're on the line.
I'm on the line, but I didn't actually write this one, to be honest with you, sir.
Okay. So it looks like Brian is relocating what was required in 53075 to 53076 for mechanical ventilation. So he's added items 1, 2, and 3 that gives the designer further details on how to design the mechanical ventilation system.
This is in the marijuana chapter specifically?
Yeah, it's in the plant growing husbandry section.
Okay. Did we just not get to this in the committee? Because I haven't.
Yeah, correct. I don't think we got to any in chapter 53. And I don't believe Lucas is on the line. So it looks like the requirement already existed. He just placed it in a different section and expanded the detail or the request to help designers understand what we were looking for. Any further commentary or questions? Anybody on the line? So he does a good job of explaining the supporting information.
Tony,
Okay.
Tony, do you have any recollection on why he decided to strike the exhaust system versus the ventilation and adding that when you go to his number 3 item where you're making sure that the ventilation is also negative pressure? I mean, it certainly looks and feels and acts like an exhaust system.
Yeah, it looks like if you read George under supporting information, he says this change clarifies and aligns with International Mechanical Code terminology for ventilation systems instead of using the term exhaust system.
Okay, so, but the reality is its form and function is still exhaust when I have positive pressure around everything else.
Correct.
So, okay, so good enough. And you're right, it's very descriptive.
So any further discussion, commentary? Okay, looking for any motion.
I'll make a motion to accept as written.
Thank you, George. I'm sorry, who seconded?
Rondo.
Okay. Okay, I don't see any additional commentary, so let's proceed. We'll take a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Please lower your hand. That was 8. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, none opposed. All those abstaining, raise your hand, please. Okay, so it looks like proposal 61 passes 8-0. Okay, moving right along, agenda item 1D. It's proposal number 68. And Mr. Dave Hill, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to turn on my mic there. Yeah, this proposal, I'm sorry, I wrote it on behalf of JD Lands and our inspections group, and it's basically just to address issues seen in the field, making sure items are labeled, clarified, the tanks, information on the tanks, that sort of thing, and just trying to make the different sections within the different subsections within that section similar. That's essentially it.
Okay, Dave or JD, if you're on the line, do dot tanks typically not have some of this information stamped or imprinted onto the cylinder?
They do actually, and I probably should have explained, the inspectors are finding that the tanks are, the information is being not rubbed off, but just with normal wear and tear, lost or is no longer visible. And therefore the question becomes, when is that tank need to be replaced or not? And so this way, the intent is that information is always valid, and if they can't find it, then the tank can't be used.
Yeah, Tony, I think the inspectors were specifically not able to find the tags because of the way the tanks were being installed and placed, specifically the high pressure manifold systems. They couldn't see the tags, so they felt that this needed to be in there to hopefully give them some latitude to have the gas suppliers place those in a way that they can see that more easily when they do their annual inspections.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess depending how they're oriented or installed, that stamping could be concealed, right?
Exactly. That's we have one dedicated inspector, and this has become a real common challenge for him as he tries to inspect these facility locations.
Perfect. Okay, any commentary, discussion from anybody else on the call? Okay, since no commentary, I'll make a motion to approve as submitted.
I can second that.
Okay, no additional commentary. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm showing 7. Please lower your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like none. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Great, okay. So that motion passes 7 to 0 to 0. Okay, I'm moving right along here. Agenda item 1E, proposal number 69. I believe that is for CO2 detection systems, submitted by Mr. Dave Hill. Go ahead, Dave.
Again, I wrote this on behalf of JD Lands and our inspections groups. It's a longer section, but really it's a bunch of subsections together, and making sure that each subsection has, again, the same text, the same requirements, so that it's consistent out in the field for our inspectors, but also for the installers and the clients who are using this stuff, so they understand exactly what is required out there. Such as, making sure there's space around the detectors or where the detector should be located. So it's just to make sure these subsections are consistent between each other.
Okay, any discussion or commentary? Okay, looking for a motion, anybody? Okay, I'll jump forward. I'll make a motion to approve as submitted. Anybody for a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you, Robert. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we have 7. Please lower your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, no one opposing. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Excellent. So that proposal's approved 7-0-0. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 1F, proposal 79. Also dealing with carbon dioxide and submitted by Mr. Dave Hill. Go ahead, Dave.
Yes, again, in this one, it's to clarify some language here. We're just trying to have the same requirements for a tank, for a CO2 tank to be the same as such as a diesel tank. The section here, 105.731 refers to getting a construction permit as opposed to the reference that's been crossed out, the Denver Building Code. So here we're just trying to clarify what the actual requirements are for the installation of the CO2 tank over 2,000 pounds.
Okay, Dave, I think that 105.731 is just used for any hazardous tanks, correct?
Sorry about that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think if I may add, and I'm sorry, I'm not raising my hand. I've been in driving, so I apologize. But the reason this got changed is because the actual construction permit for the install of the tank that's over 2,000 pounds it is issued by the fire department, not necessarily by the building department. And there was a lot of confusion on that, and that's triggered out of section 105.7 for construction permits in the fire code.
Okay, thank you, JD. Any other commentary or discussion? Okay, and looking for a motion, anybody?
All a motion to approve as written.
And I'm sorry, who was it?
Craig.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. Anybody second?
Second, Rondo.
Okay. Any further discussion, questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the section 105 is within the same Denver amendment version of the IFC, correct? It's pointing back to the same amendment, not the base code.
Yep. And that is, it does point back to underground or hazardous material storage tanks. Okay, so based on the motion that's on the floor, let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 7. Please lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, no opposed. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, so that a motion for approval on item or proposal 79 passes 7-0-0. Okay, moving on, item 70. I don't see John Sebastian on the call, but this is a simple one. I'll explain it. Traditionally, in Denver Fire Code amendments, we've had an appendix that attempts to describe what the submittal requirements are for each required construction permit. And that's language that I don't believe needs to be code language. The intent is to create an appendix O to supersede appendix N that exists today. And that would just point to a guideline or policy that the fire department would maintain on the website. And what that would help facilitate is we had different experience. Currently, I believe there's 38 construction permits issued by the fire department, 38 different topics. That would help us make edits to that guideline as things in the industry change or new items trend for contractors in understanding our submittal requirements. Right now, with it being stuck in code, we really can't make changes unless it gets approved by city council. So we're kind of restricted to modifying or making necessary edits to each code cycle, which happens every 3 years. So basically, we're creating appendix O that would redirect to the guideline that would be maintained on the fire department's website under policies page. Again, these don't create any code requirements. It's nothing more than giving submitting customers direction on what's needed within the submittals so that we can properly technically review, process, and issue the permits. Any questions or comments?
Does the document you are going to create to replace Appendix N exist yet?
So we currently only have Appendix N, which I believe covered, 18 or 19 of the 38 required items. There's not going to be a lot of changes. For example, the sprinkler portion, Robert, would not have a lot of changes. I believe the big changes would be adding the requirements that are not yet covered for the 14 or 15 construction permits that are required. One of those examples would be the foundation plans that we just talked about on CO2 systems. We give direction that a permit's required, but we don't have anything in the code that specifies what the submittal should contain. And that's what would be expanded in the guideline.
So one concern I have there, Tony, is your current requirements, and I guess for all types of submittals, to require a professional engineer stamp. That lives in Appendix N, and that seems to me to be something that you're going above and beyond what code is required, and that's something that I feel should live in code, not be a document subject to frequent revision, I guess. curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Robert.
Other than that, I mean, you're right. General submittal requirements, I agree. That's something I don't feel should be in building code, but something like that you guys are trying to do above and beyond current code, that I don't think that should be something that lives outside of code.
Yeah, and I think, to be specific, Robert, that we only go above and beyond the state suppression rules. That only applies to fire sprinkler systems. Because I think everything else that requires a construction permit is regulated under DORA, which already requires the seal and signature of a design professional.
Fire alarm wouldn't require a professional engineer?
It does. I think everything that requires a construction permit, the 38 items, are all regulated under DORA, which already has those provisions. The only thing that doesn't under state rules to require the PE seal is suppression, but that's the amendment we have in Denver, that we want design professionals being in responsible charge of that design work. So maybe Robert, to address your concerns, we would add that into 105.7, which is the driver for what's requiring construction permits.
Yeah, that would seem reasonable to me. I don't know how you go about doing that, but I guess that's my only concern. So if you find a way to address that somehow, I'm good with it.
Any comments or commentary from anybody else on the call?
I think, Tony, if you could somehow follow that up administratively, it does make sense that whenever it's referencing something that is typically, as Robert has mentioned, like the fire code, where in some jurisdictions, it doesn't require the full engineered stamp, even though you're referencing the state DORA rules, other jurisdictions are not. So having that codified seems to make a lot more sense, since it's your standard policy.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Robert. So I've notated that, and we'll make that editorial change to 105.7, which is the driver for construction permits. Okay, anybody else? Comments, questions? Okay. Looking for a motion, anybody?
I'll make a motion to accept as written.
Second.
Okay. Any commentary? None. So let's take a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we have 8. Please lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Doesn't look like anybody opposed. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, looks like that motion passes 8-0-0. And with that, it looks like we conclude and process the 9 pending proposals. Any questions or commentary from anybody?
Tony, can you tell me what the timetable is now that kind of gone through this? What do you see to expect out there?
I think we're targeting, George, to probably have a working draft here in the second quarter, posted for comment. And I believe Eric's intent, building officials' intent, to go to city council to start the hearing process in third or fourth quarter, depending on what public commentary arises during the draft stage.
Thank you. Thank you for the process. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you all for participating, especially taking the time to sit on this additional hearing that hadn't been planned, and all your efforts throughout the process. So again, thank you, everybody, and we will be in touch.
Hey, Tony, real quick, as a newcomer to this committee, is there any future involvement as it relates to the public feedback process that we would potentially reconvene for any reason?
Yeah, I think Wayne, once we put the draft out and we get a feel for what the public commentary is, there may be a need. Yeah, I can give you in the 2019 process, I think there was 1 or 2 items that came through, and actually we had to have several additional hearings, and it actually extended the process by 6 months over 2 topics. So hopefully, we've done a good enough job of having public input through this process, and we can avoid that this time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
All right, all have a great afternoon. Thanks for your participation.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.